Welcome to OPHERcoming the Odds podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, thanks for tuning in. My name is Bobby Hawk, and in a couple of moments, you'll be able to watch Opher Rom and myself talk about the history of Israel or some of the things about Israel that we find interesting. Now, all of our podcasts, the entire first season, 12 episodes, were recorded in June of 2023. The goal was to release one each month, July of 2023 through June of 2024, with the possibility of a season 2. We've released 4 episodes so far, and as I record this, it is now October of 2023. Israel is unfortunately in war, and there's unprecedented conflict in the region. So we're going to release episodes 5 through 12 over an 8-day period here in October. Again, as you listen to these, you'll probably notice a couple of things. They were meant to be released monthly, so you may hear us refer to that. We also refer to trips to the Holy Lands and the safety that we've experienced in the past. However, that's changed. I personally have had to cancel 3 trips over the next several months because of the conflict that's taking place in Israel. So I'm going to ask you to consider that as you listen or watch the podcast. Know that those were pre-recorded in June and understand that we're releasing all 8 episodes that are remaining now. So whether you're watching episode 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12, they'll all be shared during this month of October as you learn more about the history of Israel, the conflict that's created for generations now, for thousands of years. It may help you even understand what's currently going on there. And also, I'm going to ask you to take a moment to pray. Pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for those who have lost loved ones, who are experiencing the devastation of their country, and pray that peace throughout that region would come quickly. In the meantime, I hope this is informational for you. I hope it's helpful as you learn more about an overview of Israel with Opher Rom. Now here we go. All right, welcome to OPHERcoming the Odds. And you may say, what kind of title is that? It's a title that includes Opher, the best guide in Israel.
Thank you.
And it's the story of really Israel. And they have overcome the odds for thousands of years. So what we're doing is we're taking this podcast, whether you're watching or listening, and we're talking through some of the important facets to this story. Now, if you've never been to Israel, I want to encourage you to consider going on a trip. We personally, my church, I'm Bobby Hawk, a pastor of Epic Church. We use CHLS, which is the Center for Holy Land Studies, and we use them because they do an incredible job in the front side and the back side, the things you see and don't see, they orchestrate. And when we go, we use Opher because he's incredible. And when you go, you get to actually hear these bus talks. These are things Opher talks about between the sites that connects the dots. It's not wasted time. In fact, it's like drinking from a fire hydrant. But we also realize that you don't retain everything when you go. So Opher and I had the idea, man, why don't we talk about some of the things that we would talk about there? And so if you've been before, it's a recap, it's a reminder, it's good. Maybe somebody encouraged you to watch this because they've been. You want to consider going on a trip. Again, our sponsor for this season is CHLS. Check them out. And maybe you just stumbled across this. We're having some fun talking through history. And in December, our 6th episode kind of works out perfect. We ended last time with Hanukkah, Christmas. We've kind of come through the Old Testament, through the intertestamental periods, and we're kind of right at the end of that. Where do you want to pick up?
Where we left off.
All right, let's do it.
So the Hasmoneans are now going to rule the land of Israel. Not only are we going to have religious autonomy, but we're going to have spiritual autonomy. We're going to mint coins to show independence. When you mint coins, you're showing the world that you are an independent nation. At some point, the Hasmoneans, who are not a part of the high priestly family, decide to take the high priesthood on themselves. And this is problematic. There is a specific line from Aaron. He's from the tribe of Levi, and they're supposed to be the actual high priests. They're the ones who go on the Day of Atonement into the Holy of Holies. They ask God for forgiveness for all the sins that the Israelites did during the year. And now we're having a family that has no business in being the high priests. And to be honest with you, this is more of a desecration than when the king of the Greeks walked into the temple. This is something that's not supposed to happen. And there are different rumors that the high priest himself, who was ousted, takes the treasures from the Holy of Holies and sets up a new temple in modern-day Ethiopia. This is one of the theories about where the Ark of the Covenant is today, and there is always like a National Geographic or a History Channel special about the Ark of the Covenant and where it might be today. And one of the places that you see them is they go to a specific area in Ethiopia where nowadays it's a Christian church that claims that they have the Ark of the Covenant in the back room somewhere. Nobody's allowed to see it. The cameras don't go in to show it to us. But this is one of these stories. There's another theory about the Ethiopian church and where they got it, because Solomon apparently had relations with the queen of the modern-day Ethiopian nation, and his son apparently takes the Ark of the Covenant with him already in the First Temple period. The idea was that I think Solomon wanted him to have a copy of it, but somebody switched it out with the real one, at least according to the traditions, and therefore, either way, whether it's First Temple period, Second Temple period, there is another active temple in Ethiopia. While the temple in Jerusalem is operating, there's another active temple now in Ethiopia. So we have the Hasmoneans ruling the area, minting coins, and they're going to take the existing temple to a new level. They're now going to glorify the temple and take the entire mountaintop that the temple was on and make it a spiritual holy area. Unfortunately for the Hasmoneans, this is usually the case. We have two siblings, two brothers, who are going to fight over who gets to rule next. And they're going to try and get the most powerful army of the day, back in those days, to back their claim to the throne. And we're talking now about the Romans. And this is when the Romans come into the land of Israel. They're basically invited. So around the year 63 BC, the Romans are going to make their way in, and instead of choosing sides between these two brothers, they just take over. And this begins the Roman period over the land of Israel, incredibly impactful period. And if we look at it from different angles, it basically continues through the Christian period, because the Romans are going to adopt eventually the Christian faith. So until the 7th century, from 63 BC until 7th century AD, we're talking about a very long rule that the Roman presence is here. And this is really a clash of cultures.
Yeah, and just for context, so those who understand, we've got the Old Testament, the New Testament, the time period we talked about in between. When we get to the beginning of the New Testament, Israel is occupied by the Romans. They're in charge.
Yes.
Militarily, politically. And that's kind of the time period in the entrance in which we find the narrative of the New Testament.
Yes.
And really, the entire New Testament is written, as you mentioned, and takes place in that time period.
Yes.
And continues with the church. So, so the Romans come in 63 BC, but the temple is going to be expanded, and
Sure.
the Temple Mount massive. I mean, it really, though we can't see the temple today, the Temple Mount itself, I mean, it's amazing what we're able to see. So talk to us about some of the characters and how that happens.
So when the Romans come into a new place, what usually happens is they conquer the place with their military, the strongest military the world's ever seen. But they conquer the people of that territory with their culture. The Romans really believe that they have the elite culture. And eventually, when the people that they are conquering see that that the Roman culture is the one to be, they'll want to be a part of that culture. They'll, adapt, they will assimilate into the Roman culture. And this is true almost everywhere that the Romans conquer, except for the land of Israel. We have these pesky Jews who have a completely different mindset, something that the Romans are not used to. They have one God, not 1,000 gods. They believe that to save a life, the Jewish people believe that to save a life it's as though you've saved an entire universe. To treat somebody for health matters is the highest thing that you can do. Even today, the greatest ultra-Orthodox rabbi in the world has a heart attack on Shabbat, which falls on the Day of Atonement. They're going to get an ambulance to take him to the hospital, and there might be an Orthodox, religious, observant Jew treating this ultra-Orthodox. Now, I'm not talking about a cold in the middle of Shabbat, but a life-threatening issue, nothing is more important than saving a life. And the Romans kill for fun. We're talking about a clash of cultures in the highest sense of it. There is just nothing in common between the Roman world and the Jewish world. And the way that the Romans would approach this is to force the people into their culture. And the more the Romans tried to force their way on the Jews, the more the Jews tried to rebel against the Romans, the more the Jews rebelled against the Romans, the more force the Romans are going to try to use. This is not a happy time period. Now, in between all these rebellions, and we have a lot of these rebellions, there is a short period of time where the Romans try something different. And they're going to appoint a Jewish king who's actually Roman by culture, but knows the Jewish people. And his name is King Herod. They're going to appoint him king of this region in the hopes that he understands the Jewish world and can accommodate or can be the link between the Jews and the Romans. At the end of the day, he's a Muppet king who basically needs to keep things calm in this area called Judea back in those days because of all the Jews that live here. He's supposed to collect the taxes and present them to the Romans. And as long as he does that, the Romans don't really care how he rules. And we're going to add to this guy's name not just King Herod, but King Herod the Great. Not because he was a great king. In fact, the Jewish people hated him, but because he was the greatest builder of all times.
Yeah.
And when we go to Israel, and you come on a tour to Israel, quite a lot of the sites are based on the buildings or the ruins of the buildings from the time of King Herod, from what he built. When we visit Caesarea Maritima, Caesarea by the sea, Roman ruins mostly built by King Herod.
Yeah, and that's a great, I think it's a great takeoff to talk about the land itself. That is one of the most fascinating things is when you see Caesarea by the sea, you get a chance to go to Masada.
Sure.
If you see places like that, even just the Temple Mount that still exists. I mean, to look at the size of the stones on the Temple Mount, to know there's only a few cranes in the world today that could actually lift those stones, and to somehow think that they did this on the side of a mountain
without electricity.
Without electricity years ago. And oftentimes I know the simple answer when you say, how do they do that? Whether it's the pyramids in Egypt or whether it's the stones of the Temple Mount, the simple answer people like to give is slaves, right? They're just talking about human labor. Here's the reality. It doesn't matter, Opher. We can have 100 guys stand around one of those stones and can't lift it. I mean, not with just human hands. Caesarea by the sea, one of the things that I love when you point out when we're there, I mean, he creates his own port.
Yes,
I mean,
he does.
He builds it out. It's not a natural
port. With the
newest
invention that the Romans had called concrete.
Yeah.
And he does it in the water.
In the water.
Yes.
It's fascinating. It would be fascinating to be able to do that today. I mean, honestly. But then, and that's where this idea of great comes from. Because I know when people hear Herod the Great, and then you start to associate, wait a second, is this the same Herod that killed his own family members?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
He's a very paranoid king.
Is this the same Herod who obviously is present and tries to kill Jesus? I mean, it's... Yeah. So why is he great? Because he is an amazing builder. That's what great means.
The greatest builder of all time.
Greatest builder. And the stuff that still stands, granted, some of it's ruins, but just shows you the amazing, again, mind, genius that he had, while crazy in other aspects from a building standpoint. And I love that's one of the things you pick up when you go there. You're like, I just don't understand. You can even explain to me how it was done.
We have evidence of this in the New Testament. The disciples come with Jesus to Jerusalem and they ask him, Lord, how did they build this? We still ask that question today.
Yeah.
How did they build this?
How? Because they understood the magnitude. So, but Herod the Great is this fascinating builder. But like you said, he's hated by the Jewish people. He's paranoid beyond anything. And that's going to create some issues, some complications that we read about even in the Bible.
And yet, even though we hated him, even the Jewish sages used to say that if you've never seen King Herod's buildings, you've never seen a beautiful building in your life. We have historians from 2,000 years ago. We're probably going to touch upon a specific one called Josephus Flavius. He was actually a Jewish Kohen at the temple at some point, and later on turns historian. He says about the projects that King Herod builds on the Temple Mount that there's no building more worthy under the sun to describe than the Temple Mount of King Herod. This is just how incredible this is. And this becomes a tour opportunity not just for the Jewish people around the world. Romans from around the world hear of the greatness of the incredible buildings that this guy, King Herod, is building, and they're coming here. This is a huge money-making operation. He is building a sweet water pool, a freshwater pool in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. The thing that makes him great is that he had the audacity to do things that people never even dreamed possible. He's taking Roman technology, but using it in a way no one thought of before. That's what makes him the great.
Not even in Rome.
Not even in Rome.
This isn't just isolated.
Right.
This is people from the Roman world are coming to Israel to see this. And what's really fascinating is we've used the term First Temple, now Second Temple period. The Temple Mount, it is at its height.
Yes.
At this time period.
King Herod the Great.
It won't last much longer, but it's at its height at this time period.
King Herod the Great is going to build for the Jewish people the largest religious center in the world. Now, when I say that, you need to imagine 144 dunams of a religious center. That's 36 acres, 27 American football fields, 22 European football fields, or 36,500 ping pong tables. We can go on with these comparisons all day long. Give or take 300,000 people were able to be all at once on the Temple Mount. And this is not just because he's a megalomaniac. This is because of necessity. Jerusalem is maybe one of the largest cities in the entire world. I don't want to say top 5, top 10. I'm not exactly sure. But it's right up there with Rome and Alexandria and Athens in Greece. It's one of the biggest. And we estimate at least 150,000 people living in the city. Now, the Jewish people are commanded by God 3 times a year to come and see the house of God. They must come to Jerusalem. Now, obviously, if you live in the United States, not the entire community of Kansas City is going to make it 3 times a year to Jerusalem. You'll send a member or two, but every community is going to send people. So we have, I'll be minimal. Let's just multiply by 2. With all the pilgrims coming in from the Galilee and from Greece and from Rome and from Egypt and all the rest of the Jewish communities, 150,000 times 2, that's already 300,000 people that want to be a part of the ceremonies that take place during a specific time of the year, during the pilgrimage days, on the Temple Mount, where the temple is. And in order to do that, he has to expand the Hasmonean temple that he sees during the time that he comes to power. And the way that he does it is genius. He is going to build 4 huge support walls surrounding the mountain itself.
Yeah, it's on a mountain. I think
it's on a mountain.
People need to understand.
And he's expanding the mountaintop.
Yeah, that's what he's doing. He's making a bigger mountain.
To illustrate this, think of taking a shoebox and putting it on my hand. And then what would happen is we have this flat platform at the top. The platform is surrounded by these 4 massive walls that he constructs. And that's the idea here. He's going to build this incredible platform, and this platform is what we call the Temple Mount. That's where the word Temple Mount comes from. And now that he has this huge platform, he can also rebuild the temple in the size that he wants. And this is going to be the largest building that the Jewish people ever saw. We're talking about a building that's roughly 160, 170 feet tall, up in the heavens. Most people never saw a 2 or 3 house, 2-3 story high building in their life 2,000 years ago. 170 feet, that's give or take 14, 15 stories of a building. Mm-hmm. That is just unbelievable.
And it's already at the top of the mountain. So we've already talked about you're looking up, you're ascending up.
Yes.
So this is something that you can't miss.
You can't miss.
It's impossible.
You can see it from outside of the city of Jerusalem. It's so big and so incredible. So it's a tourist attraction of the highest caliber. Yeah. You know, it's like today you want to go and see the Leaning Tower of Pisa or the the Liberty Bell, Lady Liberty in New York. All of these places, the people from all around the world want Eiffel Tower. People from all over the world hear about it, want to see it, not just the Jewish people. So aside from the 300,000 Jews that are making their way now, we also have Romans from all over the world. And they all congregate towards the area of Jerusalem, one of the largest cities in the world. Now, hand in hand with the city of Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish people at that time, we have the second largest city in this area called Caesarea Maritima. And this is going to highlight the difference between the Romans and the Jews. As long as we have a Jewish temple in Jerusalem, this is the most important city that Israel has. Once the temple is going to be destroyed, suddenly Caesarea takes the reign. And not just being the capital of the Romans, it's going to be the capital of the entire region. Yes. And it becomes a monster of a city.
Yeah, and from a biblical perspective, we'll get to Caesarea more really in the book of Acts when we see that play out. But this this time period, this is the time period that Jesus is born into.
Exactly. Before King Herod the Great is going to die, Jesus is going to be born. And he's born in Bethlehem. We know very little about the childhood of Jesus, at least from the writings. We can extrapolate, we can understand through understanding the Jewish culture of the time, maybe how Jesus is going to be raised. We're probably going to be talking about these issues. We know that he's going to be raised in Nazareth with his parents. We know that at the age of 12, the Bible is very clear on this, as their custom. Jesus' family is a very devout family. As their custom, they're coming to the temple, and Jesus at the age of 12 is going to be there for one of the celebrations of the pilgrimage holidays of the Jewish people. This is also when his parents kind of leave him behind and go to Jericho. This is a 9-hour walk, people. Yeah. How do you leave your only child, assuming he's the only child, how do you leave him in Jerusalem? Make your way all the way to Jericho, and only then you find out that he's missing. Now, when they do, of course, they go back to Jerusalem. They find him at the temple. And this is one of the only stories we have about Jesus as a child.
Yeah, it is kind of fascinating because if we go to Bethlehem, now of course, it's a city.
Yes.
It's a modern city, large in size, in scope. Compared to then, we're talking very obscure, very small. And I think what some people, again, maybe don't connect the dots with, but this is where it's fascinating to go and see, is let's talk about a couple things with the Christmas story.
Sure.
That sort of have just become the narrative, even though it's not the biblical narrative. So one of the things that I love when people see is, first of all, this is not a motel. Oftentimes, Opher, in our reenactments and little kids playing a part in a Christmas play, we see the innkeeper and he tells Mary, who's about to have this baby, I'm sorry, I don't have any more rooms. There's no room in the inn. Probably a poor understanding of the word, and maybe even a greater misunderstanding of just culture in that day. Because when you understand the culture and you understand the idea of that word, it actually, Opher, makes perfect sense. And then when you go on site and you see these kind of houses built into these caves and the dwellings, it all kind of connects in a way that's like, right. Oh, that makes more sense. There was no motel in Bethlehem, not at that time period. So you want to talk to us a little bit about, help us understand that, because this is where the land itself and even visiting and seeing it makes so much more sense of the story than what we sort of read into it.
So what is going to happen is that there's a census. The Romans once in a while need to know how many people there are in each place because they're collecting taxes according to the amount of people. And when the census is happening, Joseph and Mary are going back to where Joseph is from, which is from Bethlehem. So they're going to have to travel back to for this census to be counted, basically. Does this mean that Joseph has property in Bethlehem? Probably. He's definitely going to have family. And you're going to go to your family. You're not going to an inn. You're going to go to the house of your forefathers, of your parents, and so on. And these houses are usually dug into the mountain, kind of like a cave, but there is 2 rooms. And what we see is we have a kataluma, which is kind of like the upper room, and that's where usually the family is going to be. The bottom floor is supposed to be for the animals, because you don't leave the animals outside during the night. You need to protect them. They need the warmth of the house, especially if it's the winter time. Jerusalem and Bethlehem get very, very cold. We have snow, believe it or not. We have snow on a yearly basis. We have a lot of rain, and we need to protect our livestock. and that's where the animals are going to be. Now, when a woman gives birth, she is considered ceremoniously unclean. She can't be with the rest of her family. Once a month as well, and after the birth and after the once in a month after a period, they have to purify themselves. And so therefore, if she can't be with the family, where's she going to go? She's going to go to the bottom floor where all the animals are as well. And if we have animals and we need to feed them, there's going to be a trough. And baby Jesus in the idea of they didn't have a bassinet, and they would put baby Jesus there. And so the idea of Jesus being born and animals around them makes perfect sense, because we're keeping the women away from the rest of the family because of uncleanliness. And of course, at the end of about 40 days after the birth, she needs to present the child to God. We need to give a sacrifice at the temple. So she would go to the temple in Jerusalem, and if it was a boy, 2 doves would be a proper sacrifice. If it was a girl, usually 1 dove. Judaism is based on sacrificing at this stage. Very, very important issues. On a day-to-day basis, you don't need the temple. But when events happen, you are miraculously healed from leprosy, a horrible skin disease. There's a specific sacrifice you need to give at the temple. Let's say a calf. If you don't have enough money, there's an economic stipulation, and you bring something cheaper. And throughout the entire Bible, throughout the entire story of Jesus' life, we see how the culture of Judaism, how the culture of the temple, how the parents are raising Jesus into that culture.
Yeah.
So all of these play into the story. And sometimes it's mistranslation, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's where there is a story where we read of the Good Samaritan.
Sure.
And it's a different word that's used for inn, or for this idea of motel. So what you're saying is it's this upper room, which is common where the people would stay. And even if there was no room, well, if everybody that's from there is descending upon there's likely it's a packed house. That wouldn't be uncommon either.
Very packed house.
But they're not out in some back stable on the backside of a motel.
Exactly.
And being with the animals, what's also fascinating for me, Opher,
I don't think there were octopuses, as I see nowadays sometimes in the recreations. You got to have everybody.
A little far in that.
But definitely a donkey, a horse.
Yeah, the basic animals. And what's interesting to me, and we'll kind of start to bring this to a close as we're in December and we think about the birth narrative anyway, is there's a lot of things that I think when you go and when you start to understand the context, first of all, we're in Bethlehem, same place where David is. It all plays into the story.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's all there. But when
a lot of connections between David and Jesus.
Yeah.
A lot of connections.
When you see it, because we go to Bethlehem and we look out over the shepherd's field and we kind of get an idea. We go into some of those caves and get kind of a feeling of what that would be like or look like. It totally changes the perspective. But another one of the things that you can pick up and learn there is Bethlehem, we're talking, 6 to 7 miles from Jerusalem. And so if there's shepherd priests, if there's those who are raising lambs for sacrifice, because if you're going to sacrifice in Jerusalem, you have to have sacrifices. And we know by the time, at least, that Jesus is an adult and he's going, that's part of what they're doing is they're selling sacrifice. You don't even need to bring it anymore.
We have a place in the city of Jerusalem, a gate in the city called the Sheep's Gate. Yeah. It's mentioned in the New Testament.
It's where they bring it in. So if they're bringing lambs and raising lambs for sacrifice from Bethlehem, then we start to make sense of this story from Luke where the shepherds see him swaddled, right? Because that wouldn't be uncommon to take one of those lamb to swaddle, their feet to try to protect them, because we need to bring an unblemished lamb, a perfect sacrifice.
If you bring a dove from the Galilee and everything is fine, but, on the way, the dove breaks a wing. You can't give that as a sacrifice anymore. So you really have to protect these animals that are going to be considered worthy of sacrificing.
Yeah. So if the shepherds see a baby swaddled and they've been told to go and see, then they're probably connecting some dots that maybe other people at that time aren't. By the way, we're talking probably a stone trough, right? We always use wood.
One of the things you find out when you come and you travel the land of Israel is that there's almost nothing made out of wood.
But there's stone everywhere.
All over the place.
Yeah.
So remember, everything that begins with the letter S.
Stone's another one. Yeah, they have a lot of stone.
We have a lot of stone.
So a stone trough, they see Jesus, he's swaddled, and you can imagine the dots that are being connected by these shepherd priests. This is the Lamb of God, as the Bible would say. This is the Lamb of God who's going to take away the sins of the world. And here this baby in Bethlehem in this stone trough is swaddled. It makes sense why the shepherds reacted the way they did. Now, another thing that, the dots that get connected when you read the Bible and you kind of put it in perspective, they're in Bethlehem for a while. Obviously, they're going to leave because of the threat with, fleeing to Egypt before they come back and the fear of that. But they're long enough. The wise men don't show up right away. That's in our manger scenes. We have everybody there at one time. Like Jesus is just born and everybody's there. But historically, they're going to come much later. And so there's going to be a time period where Jesus is in Bethlehem, and then he's going to go to Egypt. And then, as you alluded, they're going to end up back in Nazareth. And we get this little glimpse when he's 12 years old, going to the temple. And I'll just touch on that, Opher. I know we don't have a lot of information, but it's fascinating when we kind of look at the road. We consider the story of the Good Samaritan. We consider this road traveled back and forth. And one insight, while I agree, it's still hard for me to kind of wrap my mind around, one insight is if you have men at the front and back of a large group of people traveling, which made sense, travel in a large group. Otherwise, you're going to end up like the guy who got beaten and robbed in the story of the Good Samaritan. I can almost picture this. So for Joseph's thinking, man, Jesus is still a child. He's with the other kids, with the women in the middle. Maybe Mary's thinking, man, Jesus is kind of manning up. He's getting old enough. He's up there with Joseph. And finally, they get to a resting point, and Mary's saying to Joseph, Jesus isn't with you, and he's saying to Mary.
The culture of walking, once you understand that, you figure out, okay, they're not bad parents.
They're not bad parents.
This is the way it was.
That's the way it was.
And we're talking about the end of a celebration. That means we have hundreds of thousands of people starting to make their way out of Jerusalem towards wherever it is that they come from. And one of the first pit stops is, of course, Jericho. And that's where you start looking for each other once you reach that pit stop. And then when they realize that Jesus is not there, they make their way
we've got
back
to go
to
back.
Jerusalem.
And that's when you see that road, the overlook that we go to, it helps with that story, the story of the Good Samaritan. But Jesus is 12. We get that little glimpse, and we're not going to really see a whole lot. Nothing recorded until he's at that age and he's going to start that public ministry. But there's things that we know about and can talk about, even with his upbringing. They're the specific Joseph being his father and his role. We'll save that for our next episode. Is going to give some insight into at least what Jesus might have experienced and learned that would have prepared him for the public ministry that we'll see. But, man, this is exciting. We're 6 episodes in, so we're halfway through with season 1.
And because this is December and it's, holiday season, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year's, everybody.
Yes.
I hope you continue to listen to us.
And thanks again to CHLS.
Absolutely.
Who takes trips all throughout the year. There's trips that are available, and go on the website, thechls.com. Check them out. A great partner in bringing people to the Holy Land, and actually a great partner in helping bring this content to you. So I want to thank Opher as we continue this overview of Israel. We'll join you again in January. We'll kick off a new year, and we'll talk more about overcoming the odds, because the story of Israel is just that. It's a story of overcoming. And so overcoming, I guess, but in our case, overcoming. So we'll see you again soon. See you in the new year.
Happy New Year's.